Hi folks, HR Funk here. With an optic that I've been wanting to review for a long time, what I have with me today is a Hilux USMC M40 rifle scope. This is a replica of the rifle scopes used by United States Marine Corps snipers back during the 1960s. And I've mentioned in past videos that as a longtime law enforcement sniper, my hero, if you will, in the sniper community is Gunnery Sergeant Carlos Hathcock, who of course became famous for his exploits back during the Vietnam War. Now I don't know if Gunny Hathcock ever used one of the M40 rifle scopes similar to this Hilux scope that I'm going to be reviewing today back in those days, but I know other Marine Corps snipers did, like Chuck Mahoney, and I have a picture or two of his rifle with a very similar rifle scope attached to it, and again, that's what this Hilux scope is hoping to replicate. Now, one of the things that's always struck me about the riflemen from that era was their ability to accomplish the things that they did with what really we would consider today to be rudimentary equipment, this scope being one of those. And one of the things I like about using optics and firearms from vintage periods is getting to experience some of what those fine riflemen had to do back in the day. Now, they did it based on skill at arms, discipline, and also, of course, the tactics that they used. But for those of us today, even though we're not back in that period, it gives us a sense of exactly what they had to use, and again, how they had to maximize the use of that equipment to do the things that they did. And we're going to take a look at this piece of equipment in this video and see just exactly what type of a reproduction Hilux is producing. And here's our first up-close look at the Hilux M40 rifle scope. Now, the original scopes used by the Marines back in the 1960s were really nothing more than a standard Redfield hunting scope that was anodized with a green finish rather than the standard black finish as the scopes would have been for those released to the U.S. commercial market. As you can see, Hilux has replicated the finish with this scope, and the shade of this green is a little bit different than the scopes that I've seen from back in the 1960s, and it's also possible that those originals had a finish that faded over time. But this is a green, essentially an OD green finish that we see on here, and again, it does very closely follow the lines of those original Redfield rifle scopes. Now, if you ever compare this to original, I think there are a couple of very minute differences in terms of some of the knurling that we see and a little bit in the shape of the turrets and one thing and another. But overall, this very closely visually replicates those scopes that were used by the Marine Corps back in the Vietnam era. Also, just like those original Redfield scopes, the Hilux M40 features a magnification range of 3 to 9 power. And as I'm turning the magnification ring, I can tell you it moves very smoothly. There is also a tail on the ring to help make quick magnification changes if you need to. And again, that is exactly the same as the scopes that would have been used back during the 1960s. And the magnification setting being used is clearly marked on the ring, and you can see that it lines up with this index mark that is on the tube itself in front of the ring. So it's very easy to set exactly the magnification you want. Although typically, I think most of the time when the scope is being used, the shooter is simply looking through the reticle and then adjusting the magnification as needed for whatever shot they're about to take. The M40 features a 40mm objective with a multi-coated lens, and the multi-coatings allow better light transmission through the scope, and also one of those coatings is the Hilux Diamond Tough coating, which helps reduce the likelihood of scratches or abrasions to the lens. The scope's ocular lens is housed inside a fast focus eyepiece that allows the shooter to quickly focus the scope's reticle for his or her vision by rotating the eyepiece one way or the other until that reticle is in clear sharp focus. And then once that clear sharp focus is achieved, there is a locking ring that allows it to be locked down to prevent any movement of the eyepiece from disturbing that clear sharp focus. Now, it's important to understand this is not a parallax adjustment. It's not going to adjust the focus of the target at varying ranges. It's simply going to adjust the focus of the reticle, so that is clearly defined for the shooter. The M40's aluminum main tube is 1 inch in diameter, so there's going to be no difficulty whatsoever in finding hardware to mount it. Moving on to the M40's reticle, we see the one technological aid that those snipers had back during the 1960s, and that is the range-finding capabilities of this optic. If you look at the very top of the field of view, you see two parallel stadia lines that are intersecting the vertical axis of the scope. Those are used to subtend a distance of 18 inches at varying distances with the changing magnification settings of the scope. In the lower right quadrant of the scope, you see a range scale, and as the power is increased and decreased, whatever range you see at the very bottom of the scope, or excuse me, the very bottom of the scale, indicates the distance you are looking at when an 18-inch target subtends the distance between those two horizontal stadia lines. And with this, the sniper was able to accurately range targets out to a distance of 600 yards. Now when the M40 is zeroed, it should be zeroed at a distance of 100 yards, and simply by using those horizontal stadia lines to capture that distance of 18 inches, you can tell what distance your target is placed at before you squeeze off your shot. Now obviously the sniper had to know the trajectory of the bullet to know what type of a hold to use at varying distances. Now there's another version of the M40 scope offered by Hilux, and that is the M40 Hunter scope. And that is exactly the same as the image you're looking at here, except on the lower vertical stadia line, there are bullet drop compensating hash marks for ranges 200, 300, 400, and 500 yards, and then at a distance of 600 yards, the bottom of that vertical stadia line where the thin line meets the thicker line can be used for a 600-yard hold. And that's one thing that I wish was an option for this particular scope, because I would prefer that reticle in this scope just for use at greater distances to help with that hold. Even so, I wanted the scope that was more in tune with the scope that we used back during the 1960s, and the Hunter version of this scope is anodized black instead of green, so I went with the more authentic looking scope, even though I do prefer the reticle in that Hunter version. Folks, one of the complaints that I've heard leveled against the original Redfield scopes is that as the magnification was changed on the scope from one setting to the next, the reticle would move inside the tube, so that as the shooter was firing and zeroing the rifle at one magnification and then would take a shot at a different magnification, the point of aim would have shifted, and ultimately the point of impact of the bullet would not have been where that shooter expected it to be. So I devised a test to see if Hilux has remedied that situation with modern engineering, and I'm using my Real Avid scope mounting kit, and what you're looking at right now is a shadow being cast by the reticle inside the M40 as a light is being shined backward through it, and the shadow is on a grid that you can see right here. And what I'm going to do in a moment is start to change the magnification, and we're going to look for any movement of the reticle on the grid. If there is any movement, that would indicate that that problem still exists in the Hilux scopes, as it did back with the Redfield scopes in the 1960s. If not, that's a pretty good indication that Hilux has corrected that. So I'm going to start to change the magnification now, and you'll see as the magnification changes, the reticle is going to start to fade a little bit, and I'm up to about 6 power now. And by the way, since this is a reverse look through the scope, that's why the ranging reticle, or the ranging scale rather, is at the top. And I am not seeing any movement of that reticle whatsoever. And we are now all the way up to 9 power, and it's becoming distorted as the magnification gets higher and higher. But you can still see it. It is still staying right where it was. And as I bring it back down to the lower magnification settings, you can see it's coming back right where it was before. So I'm not seeing any shift there at all. Like I said, as we get to the high settings, and I'm going to go back up through again, it starts to distort somewhat, but we can see that it's not moving, which is the important thing. And by the way, that distortion does not occur when you're actually looking through the scope. Here is an up-close look at the windage and elevation adjustment turrets on the M40 scope. And as you can see, they are graduated in 1/4 minute of angle clicks. And these are finger adjustable, and they are both audible clicks, and you can see the visual hash marks around the circumference of each turret. And even though these can be finger adjusted, or you can use a coin or some similar tool, that's not really what they're used for during shooting. These are really only used for zeroing the optic. Once it's zeroed, as I said, the shooter is expected to use a hold in conjunction with the reticle, as I already explained. Now around each turret, there is a ring that you are supposed to be able to turn to line up with this indicator mark on the turret itself, so you can establish where you zeroed the scope. But for the life of me, I cannot get these things to turn. It's not that big a deal. Once you establish your zero, all you need to do is make another mark there, or some other way indicate where your scope is when it's at proper zero. And as I said before, you're not dialing these things every time you go from one distance to another distance, so it's not really that big a deal, but I just was not able to get those things to budge. The M40 scope comes along with a set of flip-up scope covers that you see here, and while these would not have been original equipment for those scopes used back during the 1960s, they are a nice modern convenience, and they help to protect those lenses from any sort of damage. So that's pretty much going to do it for my discussion of the characteristics of the M40 scope. Now let's talk about how it shot when I got it out to the range. After mounting it to the Ruger American Hunter that you see here, I went out to the range, and when I was out there it was 23 degrees and I had a pretty stiff wind blowing from my 12 o'clock, which is to say it was cold. I fired my very first shot to establish a rough zero at 25 yards, and there were other shooters out there, so I could not go down range and get a precise measurement. I was holding dead center in this target. By the way, this is a recycled target, which is why it has all the stickers on there, so just ignore those. But I was holding dead center in this target from 25 yards, and the shot struck down here. I was estimating through the scope that this was about 7 inches low, but really, as I said, that was a guesstimation, and since I couldn't go down and measure, I made a sight correction, and I came up 25 minutes of angle, which was 100 clicks, and I was thinking that was going to correct for about that 7-inch difference. Actually, that was 6.75 inches if I do the math, and shot number 2 hit right here. This is exactly 6.75 inches above shot number 1. So the correction through the sight using those 1/4 minute of angle clicks was exactly right on the money. I also came left 1 minute of angle, which would be 0.262 inches from that distance of 25 yards. And you can see, if I can get both of these on there, that shot number 2 is pretty much exactly 1/4 of an inch to the right of shot number 1. So the adjustments of the M40 scope appear to be just about perfect. I made another couple of corrections. This was the last one I fired, and I know that with the sight being this high above the bore line of the rifle from that distance of 25 yards, the shot has to hit between 1/2 and 3/4 of an inch low at that distance of 25 yards to be dead on at 100 yards. This was my last shot. I calculated that was about that right distance below my point of aim from 25 yards. So I stopped at 25 yards and went immediately to 100 yards, and I'll show you the 100-yard target in just a moment. So after 4 shots at 25 yards, this was shot number 5, which was my first shot at 100 yards, and it was just slightly to the left from that distance. I came right 3/4 of a minute of angle and fired shots 6, 7, and 8, and these measure at just barely over 1 minute of angle. In fact, it's 1.0138 minutes of angle at that distance of 100 yards. That's close enough. I'm going to call this a 1 MOA 3-shot group with this 9-power scope. So we can see, even with the lower power scope, the 40mm objective, the 1-inch tube, etc., this optic is capable of allowing the shooter to have some very, very good accuracy, and I was quite impressed with this. And since this was really just an initial zero with this optic, I was not using any sort of special ammunition. This is plain old M80 149 grain 7.62mm NATO ammunition, so it's not even match ammunition, and I'm already getting minute of angle accuracy with that scope. Now, by the time I finished this group, I was getting cold enough because I was also working with another rifle out there at the same time. I'd been on the range at this point for a couple of hours, and I decided that I'm going to wait for a warmer day to go back out to the range and take a look at the ranging capabilities of that reticle. When it comes to criticisms of the M40 scope, I really don't have many, folks. I get a little bit of the fishbowl effect when I look through these lenses. At the very outside edge, you see a little bit of distortion. Also, the reticle is a little thick in the stadia lines for really precise placement of the shots. But this scope, much like the Redfield that preceded it many decades ago, was intended to be accurate enough to get effective shots on target quickly. It was not a pinpoint precision target scope, if you will. And in that regard, we get an idea of how those riflemen back in the day, with the skills that they had to take maximum advantage of the equipment that they had available to them, were able to do some of the things that they did. And obviously, these vintage rifle scopes are still capable of some very good performance, as you saw on that last target that I showed you. In any case, that's going to do it for the video today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments, as always, make sure you forward those to me. Remember, if you purchase anything from Optics Planet, be sure to use my discount code, which is... And if you use that discount code, that'll save you 7% off your purchase from Optics Planet. And I want to say thanks to the folks at Optics Planet for providing the M40 scope for this review today. Also, remember the discount code for House of Pain. If you go to House of Pain, you can use my discount code there at either House of Pain Munitions or House of Pain Armament. My discount code is HRFUNK10, and that'll save you 10% off your purchase from House of Pain. And certainly don't forget the Target sponsor for the channel. Go to Target's online, check out their inventory, and see if they have anything that's going to meet your Target needs. See you next time, folks. And until then, good shooting. Bye-bye.